Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Kobos. This is Kiana Zermeno, and we're from the Kobos Law Firm. Our law firm represents 16 victims in what is inarguably one of the largest sexual assault cases ever to happen in the U.S. Army history. There are potentially hundreds of victims of Dr. Blaine McGraw and of institutional failures that happened right here at Fort Hood. By way of introduction, let me give you a little bit of my background. I went to West Point. I graduated from West Point in 2003. I commissioned, having learned the values of duty, honor, and country, and I commissioned into the Military Police Corps, and I was stationed right here at Fort Hood from 2003 to 2006. That is the reason that this case means so much to me, because I had family members that were treated at Darnall Hospital. I had soldiers under my command who received treatment and services from the U.S. Army and from the medical personnel here at Fort Hood. And it devastates me to know that the Army has failed them institutionally and systematically for years. And only now does the truth get uncovered. When I was a military police officer, our creed, our motto was to protect and defend. And that is what my law firm is doing in this case. We are protecting and defending the survivors, the victims of this sexual assault, from the predators who are doctors that are serving and photographing improperly their patients, and from the organizations that are failing those soldiers. We're here to protect and defend, and we are doing that through claims against Dr. McGraw and through federal tort act claims against the U.S. Army. Now let me tell you about what happened in this case, what brings us here. And that is that there was an OBGYN named Dr. Blaine McGraw. He was licensed in 2019. He's a former infantryman, and he was stationed here at Darnall Hospital. He would treat survivors, victims, his patients, OBGYN ladies who would go in for breast examinations. They would go in and check up on their pregnancies. And he would improperly photograph and videotape these women as he was conducting those procedures. As he was conducting the procedures, he would go to a back room, he would put his phone in his breast pocket, and he would explain to the women that he's expecting a phone call. He didn't want there to be any suspicions of impropriety because he had his phone on him. At other times, he would pull his phone out, and in front of patients, he would say, "I'm taking notes." And then he would secretly photograph the women who were exposed, who were vulnerable, and who were alone. And that's one of the big issues in this case. Dr. McGraw, on many occasions, was alone with his patients in their medical rooms. Even when they asked for other folks to come and to join them, they were denied. We have occasions, we have victims who gave us statements that they asked for their husbands to be in the room with them during their appointment. And the Army turned them down. They said, no, your husband is going to have to wait in the waiting room during this procedure. And they were left alone with Dr. McGraw to be vulnerable and to be photographed, and that is not okay. It's against Army policy. It's against institutional values of a medical profession and against a doctor's medical values, and it's just straight up wrong. Aside from videotaping patients, Dr. McGraw would improperly touch patients. He would grope them. He would tell them that they needed to conduct procedures like breast examinations that they weren't there for. And when they exposed themselves, they would touch him, he would touch their genitalia, and he did this improperly and without consent, based on a fraudulent representation that this was a medical procedure that needed to happen. He made inappropriate comments. He would comment on women and about how they looked. That's improper for a male. That's improper for anybody to make those comments, but Dr. McGraw would do that. His exams oftentimes would have no chaperones, or he would send a nurse out so that he could conduct these examinations. As I told you, many of the women asked for their husbands to be present, and they were denied that access. On occasions, he would call and text patients after hours, late at night. He would schedule exams that are off the books. This happened on many, many occasions, and here's what we know. These are based on allegations that we've received from the victims. These are going to be complaints in the lawsuit that we file. And we know that CID has contacted numerous women, over 24 women, notifying them that their pictures and their videos have been found on Dr. McGraw's phone. And the other thing that we know is that there are potentially hundreds more victims who have not yet been identified or who cannot be identified based on what appears in those photos and those videos. Now, there are bad people all around society. There's always going to be bad people. The issue is that when the institution that employs those bad people fails to recognize it and fails to take corrective action, that's when it becomes the organization's fault. And that is a fault of Fort Hood, that is a fault of Darnell Hospital, and that is something that we're going to contend with and they're going to contend with in these claims that are going to be brought. Let me tell you about this situation and how this whole situation was uncovered. It was uncovered 18 days ago, October the 17th, 2025. There was a woman who was a patient of Dr. McGraw's who was in the room. And there was her husband. Her husband was also there in the room. Dr. McGraw leaned forward, his phone tipped forward, and the husband was able to visually confirm that that phone was being recorded. And he panicked. He did not know what to do. He turned around and he told the hospital personnel, he told one of the sergeants who was on staff, I need to talk to the NCOIC. But his complaint fell on deaf ears. The NCOIC never arrived. There was never anybody as a first line report for that husband to be able to point out this conduct. After that, they called CID. Fortunately, CID at that point started an investigation. But unbeknownst to the husband, CID was conducting their investigation, and he turned around and he wanted to tell the chain of command. He wanted this information to get to the very top so that the leadership could enforce and recognize and investigate and make corrections where they needed to make corrections. But that leadership was nowhere to be found. He went over to 3rd Corps, that building right there. He went over to 3rd Corps and he tried to meet with the commanding officer and the sergeant major, but they weren't available to meet. So he tried to meet with a deputy commander and he was turned down. They told him that he needed to send an email. That's improper. That's not leadership. That's not listening to soldiers. That's not putting people first. This husband turned around and he went to Darnell Hospital. He demanded, I need to meet with the commander of Darnell Hospital. I need to meet with the sergeant major of Darnell Hospital. But he was told that they were in a meeting, that there was no deputy that was available to meet with him. And they pushed him down further and further down the chain of command until finally someone of a much lower rank, much lesser capability to enact change, till he was able to talk to them. These are institutional failures, but there's more. See, Darnell Hospital had plenty of notifications from victims that this doctor was acting improperly towards them. In fact, there was a victim statement. One of the witnesses came out and she sent an email to us and she said, we previously complained about this doctor and the possibility that he was photographing and videotaping women at a prior duty post. But that fell on deaf ears. The complaints that these victims had against Dr. McGraw, they fell on deaf ears. Nobody listened. Nobody sat up. Nobody paid attention. And now we potentially have hundreds of victims in one of the largest sexual assault cases ever in Army history. So far, we haven't heard a peep from 3rd Corps. We haven't heard a peep from Darnell Hospital. Let me remind you, this occurred 18 days ago. Over 2 weeks ago, the Army knew that this man was improperly videotaping and photographing him. 2 weeks ago. We haven't had a town hall. I haven't seen a town hall. I haven't seen a press release. I haven't seen an acknowledgement to the victims. I haven't seen anything. Where's the leadership? Most importantly, there's been no trauma counseling that's been set up. The victims have one meeting, and that was with CID. They have one meeting with CID. Where's the chain of command asking these questions? How the institution failed them. Where's the chain of command in all of this? They're nowhere to be found. It falls on CID to conduct this investigation. These ladies, they go to CID, they make their reports, they identify themselves in the photos and the videos, and they walk out and they go home. There's no trauma counselors there. There should be a trauma counselor sitting outside that room after they give their statement, ready to assist the victims. But that's the absence. That's an absence of leadership. Instead, victims get a pamphlet. Here's some helpful numbers. You might want to call these telephone numbers. You might want to contact these numbers if you have any questions. If you need any assistance, contact these numbers. Talk about taking the burden of responsibility and putting on the victim's shoulders. This is why we have leaders in the Army. This is why we have a chain of command, to take that burden off of the victims and to ensure that they receive proper care and treatment. But that didn't occur at all in this case. So to recap, they knew that these failures existed. They knew there were reports on McGraw, and there's been no response from the Army over 2 weeks after this incident occurred. Many of these victims said, I can't go back to Darnall Hospital. I can't see one of the OBGYNs. You broke my trust. I want to see somebody off post. But the Army said, we have the first right of refusal. We have the first right of refusal for any off-post providers. We learned that the Army, Darnall Hospital, apparently is trying to gaslight the victims. They're trying to tell them that in order to get an off-post referral, it's going to take 6 to 9 months to be seen by a provider that's not at Darnall Hospital. Once we heard this, we went and we verified that. We called OBGYN providers, and guess what we found? We found that within 25 miles, you could get an appointment in 2.5 months. If you go further, if we extend that range out to 100 miles, you can get an OBGYN appointment within 2 weeks. These victims should know that. They should request off-post referrals if they don't trust their doctors and their medical providers at Darnall Hospital. This is a big case, folks. This is a big case, not just because of what one individual did. It's a big case because this institution, Fort Hood, failed the victims. And I'm going to address later on the pattern and practice that Fort Hood has become known for in a failure to recognize sexual assault and address it with swiftness. But first, what I want to do is I want to introduce you to some of the individuals in this case. We're not going to name them by name, but they're going to give a statement because their stories need to be heard. What they've gone through, that needs to be heard. And so they're going to talk, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to identify them as Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, Jane Doe 3. So right now, if you wouldn't mind, Jane Doe 1, come up to the mic and address this situation.
I am here today, not only for myself, but for every woman whose trust, privacy, and safety were violated by Dr. Blaine McGraw. This past summer, I was scheduled for an appointment with Dr. McGraw for what should have been one of the most reassuring moments of my life, an ultrasound for my pregnancy. I had experienced my first miscarriage just a month prior, and I simply wanted to just make sure my rainbow baby was okay. Instead of being met with compassion during a vulnerable time of my life, I became a victim of Dr. McGraw's inappropriate and invasive behavior. He crossed professional and personal boundaries in ways that made me feel deeply uncomfortable and unsafe. He then further violated my trust by lying in his clinical report about the things that he said and the ways that he touched me during that visit. I filed a formal complaint against Dr. McGraw with Darnall soon after my encounter, hoping it would be taken seriously, hoping it would protect other women from experiencing what I did that day. Within a week, I was contacted by the hospital and I was told that he would only be spoken to. I had to verbally request that I not be seen by him again. Unfortunately, Dr. McGraw was allowed to continue practicing and he went on to commit even worse acts. Now it has come to light that he has been secretly filming and recording his patients without their consent. The betrayal, the disgust, the violation, there are no words strong enough to describe what he has done or for how long he has been doing it. What hurts even more is that as an active duty military spouse, we often do not have the option to seek medical care elsewhere. We're forced to place our faith and trust in the on-base medical system, but that system has failed us. That failure has protected a predator and allowed him to continue violating women under the disguise of medical care. Dr. McGraw stole our safety, he stole our dignity, and he stole our trust in the medical field, and we may never get that back. We deserve better. Every woman, every patient deserves better. We deserve a system that listens when we speak up, that acts when a complaint is filed, and that values safety over reputation. And I hope today that my statement reminds those in power that accountability is necessary, not optional. Because if mine or another woman's voice had been taken more seriously sooner, perhaps so many others would not be standing here as victims today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we will hear from Jane Doe number 2.
I have traveled from Colorado to be here today in order to have my voice heard regarding a physician in question from Darnall Hospital and my experience so far and how it has been handled, or lack thereof, on part of Darnall and CID at Fort Hood. Blaine McGraw was a physician I once trusted from the Women's Center, only to have that trust violated when he took it upon himself to perform a second vaginal surgery on me without my consent while under general anesthesia, and was manipulated into believing this was okay when I was in recovery and in pain. Through my own research and the help of a single professional individual who I will not name at this time, we discovered extremely concerning information and actions that were done that shouldn't have been, while others that should have been done were not, including calling my private residence, including calling my private residence at 9:30 on a weeknight the day after having an off-post pelvic surgery to schedule a vaginal surgery that he wanted to perform on me. Not even 48 hours after that, he had me in a pre-op appointment to which he was trying to talk me into doing a vaginal procedure right then and there in the women's clinic. This is only a small portion of my experience with him. The situation presents a lot of questions, concerns, and explanations that are not being provided or are being presented simply as this never should have happened. Yet it did. It did, and now CID is stating all victims are being contacted, but so many are being missed with little to no explanation. I was contacted by a sharp representative for the Army and was told the investigator with CID would for sure promptly be contacting me, only to find out that this did not happen until yesterday, November 3rd, 2025, shortly after they learned about the press conference happening here today. This comes across to the victims like myself as if reasoning behind finally reaching out to me has motives other than providing me with assistance. I don't believe I'm alone when I say I deserve answers. My trust in medical providers has been shattered, and the Army has done little to nothing to aid me in resources to navigate this. I fear going to sleep at night out of what may happen to me while I am asleep, and wake up in a panic out of what may have happened while I was sleeping. My trust was broken and my peace was stolen, but my voice is still mine. And today I'm using it, not out of anger, but out of a deep belief that no one else should ever have to experience what we did. I hope that by standing here, others find the courage to speak, and that those in power finally listen, because changes start when the truth is heard, because changes start with truth, and truth starts with being heard. Thank you.
There are many different ways that Dr. McGraw's actions have impacted me and my family. I am a first-time mother. Dr. Blaine McGraw delivered my son on June 18th. Dr. Blaine McGraw delivered my son on June 18th, 2025. Before, every time I looked at my son, I would remember those first few days with so much love and happiness. Now, every time I remember, all I can think about is how I was violated during the most vulnerable time of my life. His actions, combined with the failure of the hospital to protect me and my privacy, will impact myself and the other victims for the rest of our lives. Dr. McGraw is a predator, and Darnall Hospital enabled her.
At this point, I'd like to introduce Kiana Zermeno from the Kobos Law Firm, and she's going to read some excerpts from statements that other victims have provided.
Victim 1. I'm a first-time mom, and I held so much excitement for an experience that was supposed to be beautiful and about giving life. And instead, I have been tainted by him. Me and my family are forever impacted from his actions and carry great disappointment towards the hospital for allowing these things to take place. Victim 2. In October, I received a call from CID at Fort Hood. They asked me to come in to answer a few questions about one of my current medical providers. The next day, I went to their office and learned that OB provider, Dr. Blaine McGraw, had secretly recorded me during at least one of my visits. When I got to the car, I broke down. I sat there crying, trying to process what just happened. This was my doctor I trusted, a doctor who made me feel heard and cared for. To find out that he used that trust to exploit me was devastating. We give so much of ourselves to the military. The very least we deserve is safety, protection from people who abuse their position and their patients' trust. Victim number 3. My experience with Dr. McGraw and the way Fort Hood and Darnell Hospital handled what happened to me has left a lasting mark on my life. What made it worse was how I found out what happened, not through any official communication, not from anyone reaching out to try to explain or support me, but through social media. Seeing it that way made me feel sick to my stomach. I felt blindsided and completely disregarded as a human being. This has been a huge trigger for me because I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I can't describe how painful it is to realize that people in institutions we are taught to trust to protect us sometimes choose silence instead. It wasn't the act itself that hurt me. It was the way it was handled afterwards. The indifference, the lack of humanity, the total absence of accountability. What Dr. McGraw did to me caused real pain, but the lack of response from those in charge made it so much worse. I've lost trust in people who are supposed to uphold integrity and compassion. Victim number 4. I recently found out that my OBGYN had been recording and taking photos of me and other women during medical appointments without our consent. During my visits, there was never a nurse or a chaperone present. I was never offered a medical gown or asked if I wanted a nurse in the room. After being discharged from the Army, I've received no support, no guidance, or mental assistance. I'm weeks away from giving birth, and I can barely think clearly. No one from CRDA-MC has reached out to ensure that the victims like me are okay. We deserve transparency, protection, and justice. This is not just about one doctor. It's about the system that failed to protect us. Victim number 6. The damage is done, and now I have to deal with trust issues I'm going to have with future medical providers.
I want to say thank you to all the victims for coming here and speaking out today. Your story is important and you will be heard. Fort Hood has a problem. Third Corps has a problem. The Army has a problem with sexual assault and the tolerance of sexual assault. They have a pattern and practice of ignoring this behavior. Exhibit number 1, this Stars and Stripes article from August the 26th, 2025 that says Fort Hood officials chose not to warn the public as a predator attacked female soldiers in their barracks for 18 months. I haven't heard anything from Fort Hood officials addressing this report. I haven't heard anything about who has been held accountable for being silent for 18 months when female soldiers are getting assaulted in their barracks. Exhibit 2, look at Joint Base Lewis McCord up in Washington. You had another doctor who is assaulting male patients. Is accountability going to happen in that case? Is accountability more than sending the individual to jail? What are you going to do to address the victims and their suffering? And exhibit number 3 is one that everybody has heard before. How many of y'all have heard of Vanessa Guillen? Here's a report. 271 pages of investigative findings about one of the most public sexual assault reports in the history of our country. I'm going to read for you 3 of the findings in this 271-page report. It says, leaders at every level failed to create a climate of dignity and respect. Check. That happened here. Failed to create a climate of dignity and respect. Finding number 2. The command structure ignored or minimized the reports of sexual harassment and abuse. What happened again here? We're not talking about Vanessa Guillen. Now we're talking about this case. History repeats itself, and it is repeating itself today. Another finding. Supervisors and commanders did not take appropriate actions upon requests and notifications. What happened here? Folks, this is Vanessa Guillen 2.0. I don't know what the Army, I don't know what 3rd Corps did with this report, but they disregarded it out of hand. They saw that report, they saw the findings in the report, and they shelved it. And now we're going through the exact same situation all over again. Change needs to happen. We're promoting change, we're bringing these cases, but within the institution itself, change needs to happen there. I'm not a commander, but if I were a commander at Fort Hood, I'd get out and I would address this situation. I'd call a town hall. I would talk to the victims and to their families, and I would let them know what we intend to do to get to the bottom of this. You may not have all the answers, but give some answers. The next thing I would do is I would have somebody investigating this outside of CID. We haven't heard anything about that. The victims are only meeting with CID. How are you going to figure out your organizational deficiencies if it's only a criminal investigation? Is somebody looking in to all the reports that were filed against Dr. McGraw? Is somebody looking in to the policy where he's the only one in the room, where he's calling patients and texting patients at night? Is somebody looking into those deficiencies? Because it doesn't sound like it. Number 3, when victims go in for those appointments, I would have a line of trauma therapists ready to meet with them. Instead, what has the Army done? They said, here's a telephone number, call somebody if you need help. That's not leadership. That's not putting people first. And so if you don't care about that, if you don't care about people first, which in this situation it didn't happen, if you don't care about people first, let's at least address mission readiness. We know of a couple occasions in these situations where husbands are on deployment and their wives are back here at Darnell Hospital being photographed and videotaped after they knew that something was awry. Mission readiness, this impacts every aspect of the military. People first, mission readiness. Let's get better at it. So now it's the call to action. Call to action, I just made the call to action for the military leaders, for those commanders. You got to do better. For our political leaders, up at Congress, you all commissioned the Vanessa Guillen report. You all told the Army to get better. It did not happen. Let's find out why. Let's find out why these failures continue to happen. And let's ensure that we have accountability. It's one thing to say we need change, and it's another thing to go through and ensure that we have change. And last, I would turn to the Pentagon. And I would say that there are a lot of unanswered questions in this situation. The victims need answers. Soldiers need answers. Families need answers. Accountability needs to happen. Transparency needs to happen. And that doesn't happen behind closed doors. That happens in broad daylight, where we can see our weaknesses, we can address our deficiencies, and we can assure our military members and their families that they are safe and protected everywhere, including the bases that they call home. That sign back there says the great place. Great is a superlative. What is it great for? Right now, the great place is great for sexual assault and tolerance. Let's make it great for something else. Thank you very much. Take 2 questions.
As a lawyer,
Hang on.
can you explain why
Hang on.
no one is to charge the
Hang on a
patient,
second, please.
especially the doctor?
Our mics are coming off of here. It's a clip. And I'll put this one on there.
Okay, can you start your question again?
Sure, let's try that.
As an attorney, you have experience with cases against the government, against military bases. Can you tell us why no one has been charged yet?
I cannot. I don't want to get out over my skis. This is a civil lawsuit. Okay, we are bringing claims under the Federal Tort Claim Act. Army investigators and Army prosecutors are investigating the conduct of Dr. McGraw. My hope is that he is held accountable. My hope is that the Army sets an example for every other person who is a medical provider or is put in a position of trust to ensure that victims and the perpetrator of actions against the victims are held accountable. That's what I hope, but I can't address that question. That's best addressed to the Army, it's best addressed to Third Corps, and I hope that they come out and answer that question.
Based on your experience, you might have an idea why, but that's more of an opinion. Thank you.
It is, and I don't, like I said, I don't want to get out over my skis.
I understand.
What are you hoping the outcome is of this lawsuit? Do you see it settling or going to trial?
When I talked to the victims, the first thing that they said when we talked about potential outcomes is they said, I want accountability. I want to know what happened. I want closure. That's what the victims are saying. They're saying, I want to ensure that this does not happen to another military family ever again. That's what I have heard as the most desirable outcome from the victims. Now, in civil law, we work to ensure that we get restitution for our clients, right? The only way that the Army can address the emotional trauma that these folks have suffered, the only way that they can address that, they can't go and give them their take away the bad memories. They can't go and give them good memories. They're going to have suffered this trauma and be victimized by this trauma for the rest of their lives. Many of them are going to need counseling for a long time. So what do we hope? We hope that the Army acknowledges that what happened was not just the result of Dr. McGraw, but of institutional failures. And we hope that the government steps up and awards restitution to these clients for the damages that they suffered. That's what we hope for.
Thank you.
Last question.
If more victims see this and want to come forward, but they're scared to, what is your message for them?
My message to them is that is understandable. It is completely understandable that a sexual assault survivor would not trust the military with their information, that wouldn't trust anybody with that information. So the first thing that I would say to a survivor of sexual assault is you do what is right for you. You don't follow some obligation. You don't follow what you think is the proper thing to do. You do what is right for you. If what you determine is that you want to add your voice to the conversation, then the second thing that I would say is that there are hundreds of voices that are going to be a part of this conversation. Like I said, this does not extend to a dozen or 24 people. There are potentially hundreds of victims in this case. So you will not stand alone. Your voice will be added to the multitude of victims who are already speaking up. The third thing I would say is that your privacy, to the best extent that we could guarantee it, will be protected. We don't want for our victims, for our clients, personal information to be put out in public. We don't want there to be any blowback against them, and so we will address those privacy concerns. And then the last thing I would say is that if you believe that you are a victim, we want to know more about it. Because even if you don't add your name to the list of individuals who are bringing the suit, your information is helpful. We've had folks who say, I don't want to be a part of this, but I do want you to know about my experience. And that helps us uncover other situations and ask the right questions. And so if you are in that situation, please give us a call. My law firm's number is 713-234-5860. We're located down in Houston, Texas, but it's a very easy hop to make it up here to Killeen. Our website is kobos.law. We're a personal injury law firm. We handle these type of cases, and we have a great track record. So look us up, do your investigative research, contact us, and let's go forward together and let's make change.